Let's now look at the background of criticism. Now, literary criticism may have a positive or a negative bias and may be a study of an individual piece of literature or an author's body of work. This is the standard definition of literary criticism, and according to me, it is the easiest way to convey the meaning of literary criticism. So, since literary criticism is offered by critics, it is bound to be subjective to a certain extent. It is bound to be a product of the critic's views, the critic's inclination towards a particular theory or a tradition, and therefore it could have a positive or a negative bias, which means that if the critic is analyzing a text which does not reflect the tradition which the critic believes in, the critic could analyze it maybe a little harshly or negatively. On the other hand, if the critic and the text come from the same tradition, then there's a strong likelihood that the critic is going to foreground or highlight the positives of the text. And therefore, it is always said that though we ought to expose ourselves to as many critical interpretations of texts as are available, at the end of the day, we need to rely on our own judgment and our own evaluation and assessment of a text. And as a reader, how we respond to a text and what appeals to us in a text. So, the first part is that it could have a certain amount of subjective influence, and that is why the term positive and negative bias surface in the definition. And secondly, the second part of the definition talks about the study of an individual piece of literature, or it could be an author's body of work, or it could be entire literature also. So it could be one particular text which a critic is analyzing and evaluating, or it could be a critic who is evaluating the whole body of an author's work. For example, if you look at Dr. Samuel Johnson, he is a noted English critic. He evaluates Shakespeare's body of work. So his criticism is based on a lot of a range of Shakespearean works or Shakespearean plays. So it is not one particular play which he's talking about, but it's a range of plays. Similarly, if you look at Philip Sidney, he does not take up any particular piece of literary work, but he looks at what literature does as a whole. So he is not picking up individual texts, he's not even picking up individual authors. He's looking at literature as a discipline, as a body of work, and its impact, its objectives, and its aims. Right? Now, literary criticism is as old as literature. The day people started expressing themselves creatively through a verbal medium, that very day, there were people who started offering critiques on these works. In ancient times, if you see, uh, writers who created their works were critics of their own work. So, first they created a text and then they explained or analyzed or evaluated their own writings. So, that used to be the practice. Then, of course, you have a tradition where writers, there was a different group of writers or creative writers who wrote creative, who came out with creative works, and there was another group of scholars who analyzed and who evaluated these works. Right now, if we look at the earliest origins of criticism, we have to look at 4th century BC. Criticism comes up with Aristotle's Poetics, and it describes literary forms with many specific criticisms of contemporary works of art.